Welcome back to Champion News Talk Radio, brought to you by championnews.net. This is Carol Parisi. Our founder, Jack Roser, and myself have our very special guest today, Rick Newton from Tri-Coun-Teas. And before the break, we were talking about the Obama deception, if you will. But during the break, we were talking about things like school boards and party structure. And so, Rick, you got involved because you knew who this president and what he really stood for. And you felt, would I be too bold to say, like you were losing your country?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what really, I've always had an interest in politics. I've always known where I stood and abided by those values. But it wasn't until that election that I decided it's not going to get done if I don't find a way to get myself out there and take part in it. So I began to find ways to get active. Along the way, one of the things that I came across, it was in the spring of 2011, was the municipal elections in which the school board candidates were up for their respective seats. And they did a candidate forum in Bartlett. It was sponsored by the League of Women Voters. And it was a shock to find out there were 4 openings, there were 6 candidates, and you could not tell the difference between the 6 candidates. It was almost as if they operated from the same template that had been written out as a script for them. And when I saw that, because you walk away with a feeling, who am I going to vote for? Mm-hmm. There is no difference, and none of them are good. So at that point, I made a commitment.
About school boards, this book sure shows you enough outrages in it throughout the state. So, outrages that are going on. And here, the candidates are all of one simple mind.
Now, specifically, what kind of issues were they speaking to? These 6 candidates, what kind of issues were they speaking to, and what do you mean the same template? A little more specific.
A couple things that stood out for me were people, they all, most of them already had some tie in education. They were either educators or ex-educators, and which is not necessarily wrong, but when you have a board.
What district is that?
U46.
U46.
Elgin Centered, it's the 2nd largest school district in Illinois.
That's Elgin.
So when you have that many people with that kind of a background, it's not bad to have, you can't say that we can't have teachers or educators on the board, but when it is the majority of people, you've got a strong bias there, and it was very apparent. And so one of the things that they began to talk about was social justice. One of the candidates started talking about social justice, and my thought was, you got to be kidding me. And what I was really concerned about was, how is this going to play into their policy in the district? And that became very apparent. So at that point, after the election, I made my own personal commitment to start attending school board meetings. I was like so many other people, so many voters who just kind of sat on the sidelines, didn't know anything about what was going on in the school boards. So it only took 2 or 3 meetings to figure this out, what problems there were.
How many meetings did you go to before you asked a question or said anything?
One. First time.
Then how did they treat you afterwards?
With increasing disdain, to be quite blunt.
I knew the answer to that because 40 years ago I did that in District 59.
Yeah.
I started attending them because, well, I was head of a homeowners group in Arlington Heights, and I invited the superintendent and the president of the board to come and tell us why our taxes should be raised. It wasn't that I was against it. I thought it was, my duty as head of a homeowners group to get the story. I, that afternoon, went and picked up the budget, spent about 2 hours reading it, and asked a few questions. I found out those guys couldn't answer the questions. And they got arrogant. They told me that I couldn't possibly understand that. So I started going to school board meetings, too.
I think they
I was
really
a skunk at a picnic.
I think they suffer significantly from something, a term I learned in the corporate world, which is groupthink. And they really, they do not have any tolerance for opposing or dissenting opinions. And so there was a meeting recently where the...
Isn't that ironic, though? Because you want to teach your kids to be very open-minded and to learn and to use critical thinking.
Oh, sure, of course.
But when you start deploying those methods, if you don't agree with them, now you're What do you mean?
I look back to see the approximate number of meetings that I've been to since about 21 months ago, and there's in excess of 40 meetings, and I can count, there's either 2 or 3 votes in all of that time in which they were not unanimous.
Yeah. Let me tell you what happened. My son Tom was on the Barrington School Board. He got elected to that. And he differed with him on it. And they went so far as to threaten him with a suit for not agreeing with him. They have a tremendous need to have unanimous votes on the whole thing.
Sounds very controlling and quite the antithesis of freedom. And now your son Tom was on the school board. You've been attending school board meetings.
And very successfully so, because he became, because of a dearth of talent otherwise, he became head of the finance committee, and he managed to have them turn a profit in it and keep the grades up as well. But it's worth, since I got into this, let me tell you about the experience. The board passed some rules that would allow them to be teaching Russian and some other languages they don't normally teach in high school, and there was a request for it, and the board granted it. Okay, we're going to have Russian and some other stuff, Chinese, I guess. And so the kids in the senior class wrote letters to the board thanking them for what they'd done. So Tom looked at the letters and he was aghast. So he started asking people, he'd say, what grade level do you think this person was that wrote this letter? What he was getting was 7th and 8th grade.
That high.
Pathetic grammar.
Pathetic.
But they want to learn Russian or Chinese, but they cannot articulate and formulate writing a letter in the English language.
Yeah.
This school superintendent this past summer.
Incidentally, and that's Barrington, which definitely is a better school than, say, Chicago.
Sure.
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity before you continue. In the next 3 days here, if you are thinking of running for school board, your petitions need to be in on the 26th. So that's a huge thing. You can get involved with your own school board. So, and For Our Children's Future can give you more information, but it's getting very close to the wire to accumulate 150 signatures over the Christmas holiday, unless you have a big family. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, Rick, go ahead. What were you
actually, there are a couple examples I wanted to share with you. The most recent was a proposal to add a new course or curriculum to the advanced placement process, which is a good thing, you know, in theory. It was a course in microeconomics. And as they talked about it, I thought, oh, this is really a good idea, until they got to the textbook that they're going to use. And the textbook that they proposed was one that was written by Paul Krugman from the New York Times. And so I had seen that. So when they had time for public comments.
Are you saying that the New York Times and Kruger are biased?
Now let me ask you a question. Does the school board get to decide what books are implemented? Do they work with the teachers? And do they get to help decide what books are going to be teaching our kids? Because microeconomics from Paul Krugman,
I think that they give some. So the public comments for this meeting were before they did the presentation, and when I got up there, I said, I have taken the time to read your agenda, and I understand what you're doing and whose textbook you're going to be using. And I said, I don't know if you people know who Paul Krugman is, and I explained it to him. And so when they did the presentation, one of the people on the committee was at least straightforward enough to say, and yes, I've heard the concern that Mr. Krugman is fairly biased, but you would never know it by reading the textbook. Well, that all depends on the filters for that person. You don't know how that person sees the world.
Yes.
And so when the board got to question this committee, one board member, her name is Jennifer Schroeder, and she said, well, I've heard all the criticisms, but I don't really care, because all I know is that Paul Krugman is a world-renowned economist and a Nobel laureate, and that's good enough for me. That's scary. Mm-hmm. That is very scary, because it's really a statement made in ignorance. Mm-hmm. It's one that's very dismissive. And that's, Jack, you said something before about how they treat you.
Lowered a lot because didn't they give one to Obama? Yeah. What was that for?
Showing up, like the trophy for showing up.
Well, and there's some Kofi Annan. There's a number of people that are not deserving. You can't tell them who to nominate, but it tells you, what little value that award has.
There's down in Texas, they have a group down there that analyzes these textbooks and recommends them, and they have a lot to say about the bias
Sure they do.
that's in many of these textbooks.
Well, I think that this is going to be something we should probably talk about more with school boards, with Rick Newton and Jack Roser when we come back after the break. Stay with us. Don't go away. It's going to be great.